They took 3 feet of my land. And for a while, I honestly thought I'd just have to live with it. Then I found something buried in my aunt's old basement that changed everything. And by the time it was over, their dream house wasn't just in trouble. It was legally impossible to keep standing the way they built it. I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for fights. I work a regular job, keep my yard tidy, wave to neighbors, that's about it. The house I live in isn't fancy, but it's been in my family for years. It used to belong to my aunt, Carol, who passed it down to me when she moved into assisted living. She was one of those meticulous, detail-oriented people, the kind who labeled boxes in her basement like she was archiving history for a museum. The neighborhood itself is quiet, older, mostly ranch-style homes, a few kids riding bikes in the afternoons, people who've been here long enough to remember each other's dogs' names. It's the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever really happens, or at least, that's what I used to think. Then about 8 months before all this started, a guy named Ethan Caldwell moved in next door. Now, Ethan, he didn't exactly fit in. Not in a loud way at first, more like everything about him just felt out of sync with the rest of us. His house was this ultra-modern glass and steel structure dropped into the middle of a street full of brick and siding, like someone accidentally pasted a downtown building into the suburbs. It was big, expensive looking, and always seemed just a little too polished, like it belonged somewhere else. People talked, of course. You hear things in neighborhoods like this. Supposedly he worked in private equity, made a lot of money flipping companies, that sort of thing. And it showed. Within weeks of moving in, there were landscapers coming twice a week, security cameras popping up on every corner of the house, contractors in and out doing upgrades that nobody had asked for. At first, I didn't really care. I figured, hey, it's his property, his money, let him do what he wants. But then I started noticing something. Every now and then, I'd catch Ethan out near the side of his yard, the strip that runs between our houses, measuring things. Not casually, either. I mean pacing, marking spots, crouching down with one of those metal measuring tapes, sometimes with another guy who looked like a contractor or surveyor. They'd talk quietly, glance toward my fence, point at the ground like they were planning something. I remember one afternoon, I was watering my plants, and I overheard a piece of their conversation. If we shifted just a bit, you gain almost a full extra strip here, the other guy said. Ethan nodded, hands in his pockets, looking right at the space that technically belonged to me. It's wasted space otherwise, he replied, real casual, like he was talking about rearranging furniture. That stuck with me. Not enough to confront him, not yet, but enough to make me uneasy. Still, nothing actually happened for a couple of weeks, so I let it go. Until one Thursday evening. I got home from work a little later than usual, maybe around 6:30, and the first thing I noticed was a truck parked along the curb. Then another. And then I saw the crew, 3 guys digging holes along the side yard. My side yard. For a second, I thought I was mistaken, like maybe they were just close to the line and I was overreacting. But the longer I stood there, the clearer it became. They weren't on the line. They were inside it. By a lot. I walked over, heart already pounding in that slow, controlled way where you're trying not to jump to conclusions, but you know something's off. Hey, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. What's going on here? One of the workers shrugged and pointed toward Ethan, who was standing a few feet away, scrolling on his phone like he had all the time in the world. I walked up to him. Ethan, what is this? He looked up, smiled. Not a warm smile, more like something practiced. Oh, hey, he said. Didn't realize you were back yet. I gestured toward the holes. Why are they digging in my yard? And that's when he said it, calm as anything. It's not your yard. I actually laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it felt so absurd. What are you talking about? He slipped his phone into his pocket, still smiling like this was all perfectly reasonable. I had a survey done, he said. Turns out the original property markers were off. This section here, he tapped the ground with his shoe. It's part of my lot. Always has been. I just stared at him. No, it's not. He gave this little shrug, like he'd already had this conversation in his head and decided he'd won it. I get that it's surprising, he said, but these things happen. Old neighborhoods, outdated records. You'd be amazed how often boundaries are wrong. Then why didn't you talk to me before starting construction? I shot back. His smile tightened just a bit. Well, I didn't think it would be an issue. That was the moment something shifted for me. Not just anger, but this quiet realization that he hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a decision, and I was the only one who hadn't been part of it. I looked down the line of holes again. They ran straight through the edge of my flower bed, the one my aunt had planted years ago. Tulips she used to take care of every spring. Now half of them were already torn up. "You're 3 feet inside my property," I said, slower this time. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "According to my survey, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." There was a pause, the kind where you can feel the conversation balancing on a knife edge. "Then I guess we're going to have a problem," I said. He nodded once, like he'd expected that. "If you think so, you should probably talk to a lawyer." And just like that, he turned back to his phone, dismissing me like the conversation was over. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the sound of shovels hitting dirt, trying to process what had just happened, and realizing, slowly, that this wasn't going to be something I could fix with a quick conversation over the fence. Not even close. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was panicking, but because my brain just wouldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing those fence posts going into the ground, right through soil I knew, without a doubt, had always been mine. And the thing that bothered me most wasn't even the fence, it was how confident Ethan had been. Like he'd already run through every possible outcome and decided none of them could touch him. The next morning, I called the city. Not in a dramatic, "I'm filing a complaint" kind of way, more like, "Hey, something doesn't look right. Can someone clarify this?" I explained the situation, gave them both addresses, mentioned the survey Ethan claimed to have. The woman on the line sounded polite, but cautious, like she'd heard this kind of thing before. "Do you have a copy of the survey?" she asked. "No," I said. "He does." "Well," she replied, "if he's working off a licensed survey and has documentation, it may be considered a civil matter. Property disputes usually require legal resolution unless there's a clear violation of zoning or easement regulations." That word stuck with me, easement. At the time, I didn't fully connect it to anything, but it lingered in the back of my mind. I hung up feeling, not defeated, exactly, but stalled. Like I'd just been told, politely, that I was on my own unless I wanted to spend thousands on a lawyer. And Ethan knew that. Over the next couple of days, the fence went up fast. Wooden panels, clean, expensive, the kind designed to give total privacy. From his side, it probably looked like a nice upgrade. From mine, it felt like someone had taken a slice out of my life and nailed it shut. Neighbors started noticing, too. Mrs. Delgado from across the street stopped me one afternoon while I was getting the mail. "Is that fence new?" she asked, squinting toward the side yard. "Yeah," I said. "Apparently part of my yard isn't mine anymore." She frowned. "That doesn't sound right." "It isn't," I replied. A couple of other neighbors had similar reactions, quiet concern, a little curiosity, but nobody wanted to get involved. And I couldn't blame them. Disputes like this have a way of pulling people in deeper than they expect. Meanwhile, Ethan acted like nothing unusual was happening. He'd walk past, give a casual nod, sometimes even a morning, like we were still just two friendly neighbors sharing a street, instead of standing on opposite sides of a legal standoff. That almost made it worse. By Saturday, I'd reached that point where frustration starts turning into something more focused, less emotional, more deliberate. I knew I couldn't outspend him in a legal battle, not right away at least. And I definitely wasn't going to let this drag on for months while that fence sat there like a permanent reminder. So I started thinking differently. Not about arguing, but about understanding. That's when I remembered my aunt. Carol had worked for the city for decades, civil engineering, infrastructure planning, the kind of job most people don't think about until something goes wrong. She used to tell me stories about drainage systems, zoning quirks, all the invisible rules that keep neighborhoods functioning even when nobody notices them. And then it hit me, her basement. When she moved out, I'd barely touched anything down there. Just boxed it up, kept it stored, figuring I'd sort through it eventually. Saturday afternoon, I finally did. The basement smelled like old paper and dust, rows of labeled boxes stacked neatly against the wall. Utilities 1984. Subdivision plans. Stormwater layouts. Stuff that probably meant nothing to most people. But to her, it had all been important. I pulled one box down at random, opened it, and started flipping through. Blueprints, maps, notes in her handwriting. And then, about 20 minutes in, I found it. A large, folded map labeled with the name of our neighborhood. Not just a street layout, but something more detailed: elevations, flow directions, markings I didn't fully understand at first glance. But one thing was clear. There were lines running through the properties, including mine, including Ethan's. I spread the map out across an old work table, smoothing the edges, leaning in closer. The more I looked, the more it started to make sense. Our street wasn't flat. It sloped, gently, but intentionally, designed to channel water during heavy rain. And those lines? They weren't random. They were drainage easements. Protected paths where water was supposed to flow, unobstructed, so the entire block wouldn't flood. And the strip Ethan had just claimed? It sat right on top of one of those paths. I actually leaned back and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how precise it all suddenly felt. Like a puzzle piece snapping into place. He hadn't just taken 3 feet of my yard. He'd built a fence across a critical drainage easement. I kept digging through the box, pulling out more documents, development agreements, notes about setback requirements, restrictions tied to those easements. The language was technical, but the meaning was clear enough. No permanent structures. No obstructions. Strict distance requirements for anything built nearby. And Ethan's property, his deck, his extended garage, that brand new fence, all of it sat right where it shouldn't. I felt something shift again, but this time, it wasn't anger. It was clarity. For the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. Sunday turned into a kind of quiet investigation. I went outside with a measuring tape, checking distances, comparing them to what I'd seen on the maps. I took photos to lots of them. The fence line, the deck supports, the way the ground sloped between the houses. At one point, I even ran a hose along the upper part of the yard just to watch how the water moved. And sure enough, it followed the exact path marked on that old blueprint. Straight through the area Ethan had just enclosed. By late afternoon, I had a folder full of evidence, photos, copies of the maps, notes I'd scribbled down trying to connect everything. That word from the city call echoed in my head again. Easement. So instead of calling the general office this time, I got more specific. I reached out to the city engineering department, then the local flood control authority, and finally, environmental compliance. I didn't exaggerate anything, didn't make it sound like some dramatic emergency. I just laid out the facts, attached the documents, explained what I believed was happening. And then, I waited. Monday morning, I was making coffee when I heard the first truck pull up. Not a construction truck, a city vehicle. Then another, and another. I stepped outside, and there they were, 3 different groups, each with clipboards, measuring tools, official badges. They moved with purpose, not confusion, like they already knew exactly what they were there to look for. Ethan came out a few minutes later, clearly not expecting any of it. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. One of the inspectors didn't even look up from his notes. "We've received reports of potential easement violations and unpermitted structures," he said. "We need to take a look at your property." For the first time since I'd met him, Ethan didn't have an immediate answer. He glanced at me, just briefly, and in that split second, I could see it. Not panic yet, but uncertainty. And that was new. From that point on, everything moved fast, but it didn't feel chaotic. It felt inevitable, like something that had been set in motion long before any of us realized it. The inspectors spread out across Ethan's yard, measuring distances, marking spots with little flags, comparing notes against documents on their tablets. One of them walked the length of the fence line, stopping every few feet to check alignment. Another crouched near the base of the deck, studying the support posts like he was reading a story written in wood and concrete. Ethan tried to regain control of the situation. You could see it in the way he straightened his posture, the way his voice shifted into that polished, confident tone he'd used the first day we argued. "There must be some mistake," he said, forcing a smile. "I had a license survey done. Everything here was cleared." The lead inspector finally looked up. "Do you have permits for the deck extension and garage modification?" he asked. Ethan hesitated, just for a second. "They were part of a broader renovation plan," he replied carefully. "That's not what I asked," the inspector said, calm but firm. "Do you have approved permits?" Silence. And right there, you could feel the ground shift under him. Not physically, not yet, but legally. They spent the next hour going over everything. Measuring setbacks from the easement line, checking elevations, documenting how the fence cut directly across what was supposed to be an open drainage path. At one point, One of the flood control guys ran water from a portable tank down the slope, just to demonstrate flow. It hit the fence and pooled. Didn't pass through. Didn't redirect. Just stopped. The inspector shook his head slightly, like he'd seen this kind of thing too many times before. That's obstruction, he said. Clear violation. Ethan started talking faster then, throwing out explanations, half-formed defenses. It's temporary, he said. We can adjust it. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal, another official cut in. This easement exists to prevent downstream flooding. You don't get to block it because it's convenient. That word again. Convenient. I almost smiled. By the end of the inspection, they issued a stop work order on the spot. Bright orange notice, taped right onto the fence he'd just finished building. The kind of thing you can't ignore, no matter how much money you have. But that was just the beginning. Over the next couple of weeks, more notices followed. Formal ones this time, letters outlining violations, required corrective actions, deadlines. The language got sharper, more specific. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was everything. The deck, too close to the easement. The garage extension, partially built over restricted ground. The grading changes, altering natural water flow. Each issue on its own might have been manageable, a fine here, an adjustment there. But together, it was a structural problem. A legal one. A very expensive one. I didn't have to do anything else at that point. No more calls, no more digging through boxes. The system had taken over, and it was thorough. Ethan, on the other hand, shifted completely. Gone was the calm confidence, the easy smiles. In its place, urgency. Contractors came back, but not to build, to assess. Lawyers started showing up, walking the property with him, pointing, discussing, shaking their heads. I caught snippets of conversations here and there. Words like non-compliant, retroactive permits, unlikely approval. One afternoon, he actually approached me again. Different tone this time. Hey, he said, standing just outside the fence, my side now technically. Can we talk? I walked over, but I didn't rush. What's up? I asked. He glanced back toward his house, then lowered his voice slightly. This situation, it's getting blown out of proportion, he said. If there's been a misunderstanding about the property line, we can work something out. I raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? I repeated. He exhaled, like he was trying to stay patient. Look, maybe the survey wasn't perfect, he admitted. It happens. But all this, he gestured toward the notices, the markings. This doesn't need to escalate. I studied him for a moment, really looked at him, not as the guy who'd taken my land, but as someone who was finally realizing he might not be in control anymore. You told me to hire a lawyer, I said. He winced, just slightly. I was just confident. I cut in. There was a pause. I can move the fence, he said. We can reset everything back to where it was. No harm done. And that's where it got complicated. Because part of me, a small part, wanted to say yes. Take the land back, call it even, move on. But the other part, the part that had spent that entire weekend digging through my aunt's work, piecing together the bigger picture, knew it wasn't that simple. It's not just the fence, I said. He frowned. What do you mean? You didn't just take 3 feet of my yard. I continued. You built over a drainage easement. You changed how water moves through this entire block. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's fixable, he said finally. Is it? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Because now he knew. Or at least, he was starting to. The next official notice made it clear. Full remediation required. That meant removal, not adjustment, not modification. Removal. The fence came down first, not ceremonially, not dramatically, just quietly dismantled by a crew that didn't stick around long. Then the deck, piece by piece, boards stacked, supports cut away. The garage was the hardest part. They had to take out an entire section, leaving the structure looking incomplete, like a sentence that never got finished. The total cost? Around $300,000. And insurance wouldn't touch it. Unpermitted work, code violations, all of it fell back on him. By the time it was over, the house didn't look like the polished, perfect structure it had been when he first moved in. It looked compromised. Not ruined, exactly, but stripped of that illusion of control he'd built around it. A couple months later, a for sale sign went up. No big announcement. No explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement that things hadn't gone the way he planned. I heard through a neighbor that he sold it at a significant loss. Didn't stick around to argue. didn't try to fight it further. Just left. And me? The city came out one last time. Official survey. Permanent markers installed along the actual property line. Concrete this time. Set deep. Not something you could casually shift or reinterpret. Solid. Unambiguous. I stood there watching them finish, hands in my pockets, feeling something settle inside me. Not victory, exactly. More like balance. Because the truth is, this whole thing could have gone differently. If he'd knocked on my door that first day, if he'd asked instead of assumed, if he'd treated that 3-foot strip like it belonged to someone, not something. Maybe none of this happens. But he didn't. And in the end, it wasn't the fence that cost him. It was the certainty that he could take something small and that nobody would push back. So now I'm curious what you think. Was this justice, or did it go too far? If you were in my place, would you have handled it differently? Or let it slide to keep the peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd probably expect.